He wasn't just a gangster, he was a celebrity, a philanthropist, and the most dangerous man in America. They called him Scarface, but to Chicago, he was the king. While the government struggled with Prohibition, Al Capone built an empire worth $100 million. In today's money, that's over $1 billion. But how did a son of immigrants go from a small-time thug to public enemy number one? Today, we dive into the dark legend of Al Capone, a man who reshaped organized crime and left an indelible mark on American history. Most people think Al Capone was born a king. They imagine him stepping off a boat from Italy with a Tommy gun in his hand. But the truth is much more American. Alphonse Capone was a Brooklyn boy, born in 1899 to hard-working immigrants. His father was a barber, his mother a seamstress. They wanted the American dream. He wanted the American empire. Al wasn't a bad kid at first. He was promising, intelligent, even. But the 14-year-old Alphonse didn't take kindly to authority. After a teacher hit him, he hit back. That was the end of his formal education and the beginning of his real schooling. The rough and tumble streets of Brooklyn, under the tutelage of the notorious 5 Points Gang. This is where he met his mentor, Johnny Torrio. If Capone was the muscle, Torrio was the cold, calculating brain. Torrio taught him that violence is a tool, a means to an end, but business, the systematic organization of illicit enterprises, is the ultimate goal. It was also during this time, working as a bouncer at the Harvard Inn, that Al made a crude comment to a woman. Her brother, Frank Galluccio, didn't appreciate it. 3 furious slashes to the left side of Al's face later, a legend was born. He hated the nickname Scarface and would often concoct elaborate stories about war wounds. The truth was far less heroic. They were the indelible marks of a street brawler who hadn't yet learned to temper his volatile temper. Yet, the move to Chicago and Prohibition's opportunity, in 1919, New York was getting too hot. Torrio had already moved to Chicago to help his uncle, Big Jim Colosimo, run his massive, legitimate brothel empire. Torrio saw the burgeoning opportunity of a nationwide alcohol ban. With Prohibition looming, he called Al for help. At 20 years old, Capone, with his young wife May and their infant son Sonny, arrived in the Windy City. He didn't look like a boss, he looked like a hired hand, a tough-looking bodyguard. But he arrived at the perfect, chaotic moment in history. January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment begins. The United States government, in its infinite wisdom, decided to ban the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. Overnight, millions of law-abiding citizens became criminals by seeking a drink, and criminals became incredibly wealthy businessmen. Big Jim Colosimo, entrenched in his brothel empire, didn't want to pivot into bootlegging. He thought it was too risky, too much trouble. Torrio and Capone saw it differently. They saw a gold mine, an untapped market worth millions. Shortly after, Big Jim was assassinated in his own restaurant. No one was ever charged, but the whispers always pointed to Torrio and Capone. They were the ones who gained the most. With Big Jim conveniently out of the way, Torrio and Capone took over. This wasn't just a gang anymore, it was the outfit, a formidable criminal syndicate. Capone immediately started organizing. He didn't just sell beer. He bought the distilleries, the breweries, the trucks, he secured the warehouses, and most importantly, he bought the people. He realized early on that you don't need to hide from the police if you own the police. Bribery became his most effective weapon. By 1924, Capone, still under Torrio's wing, was practically the uncrowned mayor of Cicero, a lucrative suburb of Chicago. During local elections, his thugs stood at the polling stations with submachine guns. If you didn't vote for Capone's hand-picked candidate, you didn't vote at all, or you found yourself facing much worse. This wasn't just crime, this was a complete, brazen occupation. By 1925, Johnny Torrio, tired of the endless bloodshed and a recent assassination attempt that nearly claimed his life, decided to retire. He famously handed the reins of the outfit to Al Capone, telling him, "It's all yours, Al. I'm through." At just 26 years old, Al Capone became the undisputed boss of Chicago's underworld. He didn't just inherit an empire, he revolutionized it. Violence and charm, Capone understood branding long before the word was common. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a celebrity. He cultivated a public image, often appearing at sporting events, opening soup kitchens during the Great Depression, and charming reporters with witty, albeit often threatening, sound bites. He famously declared, "I am a businessman. I make my money by satisfying a public demand." This was his genius, presenting himself as a service provider, not a criminal. His control extended far beyond Cicero. He ran a vast network of speakeasies, breweries, distilleries, brothels, and gambling dens. His enterprises generated an estimated $100 million annually, a staggering sum in the 1920s, equivalent to well over $1 billion today. This wealth allowed him to live a lavish lifestyle, driving custom-armored Cadillacs, wearing expensive silk suits, and staying in luxurious hotel suites. His headquarters, the Lexington Hotel, became a symbol of his power and defiance. During the bleak years of the Great Depression, while millions struggled, Capone ensured that his soup kitchens fed thousands of the city's poor. This created a paradoxical public perception. To some, he was a ruthless killer. To others, a benevolent Robin Hood figure, doing more for the common man than the struggling government. He understood the power of public opinion, and he expertly manipulated it. However, beneath the veneer of charity and charm lay an iron fist. Capone's methods for maintaining control were brutal and unequivocal. Rival gangs, particularly the North Side gang led by Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran, fiercely contested his territory. This led to an escalating series of bloody gang wars, defining Chicago's reputation as a city of violence and lawlessness. Capone's power was directly proportional to the corruption he fostered. He had police officers, judges, and politicians on his payroll. It was said that you couldn't get elected dog catcher in Chicago without Capone's approval. This deep-seated corruption made him seemingly untouchable. Local authorities were either too afraid or too compromised to bring him down. The city's official structures often looked the other way, or actively facilitated his operations, illustrating the profound grip he had on every facet of Chicago society. He was often quoted, half-jokingly, half-threateningly, in the newspapers. His face became instantly recognizable, his name synonymous with both fear and fascination. He was a symbol of the Roaring Twenties, an era of excess, defiance, and a dramatic redefinition of American morality. But as his power grew, so did the desperation of the federal government to stop him. The question wasn't if his empire would fall, but how. While Al Capone cultivated his image as a charming businessman, the foundation of his empire was built on fear, intimidation, and brutal violence. The streets of Chicago were his battlefield, and rival gangs were his enemies. Chief among them was the North Side Gang, initially led by Diane O'Banion, and later by Jaime Weiss and then George Bugs Moran. These men refused to yield to Capone's dominance, leading to a bloody and protracted gang war that would culminate in one of the most infamous acts of mob violence in American history. The rivalry between Capone's outfit and the North Siders was relentless. There were assassinations, car bombings, and shootouts in broad daylight. In 1926, Jaime Weiss attempted to assassinate Capone, riddling his hotel with bullets. Capone barely escaped. This personal vendetta fueled his desire for ultimate control, to eliminate any and all challenges to his supremacy. He wanted to send an unmistakable message that challenging Al Capone meant certain death. February 14, 1929. The Day of Blood, the morning of February 14, 1929, dawned cold and bleak in Chicago. 7 members and associates of Bugs Moran's North Side Gang gathered at a garage at 2122 North Clark Street. They believed they were there to pick up a shipment of hijacked whiskey. Instead, they walked into a meticulously planned ambush. Around 10:30 a.m., 2 men dressed as uniformed police officers, accompanied by 2 men in plain clothes, burst into the garage. Believing it was a legitimate police raid, Moran's men dutifully lined up against a wall, as was customary during such shakedowns. They had no idea they were facing Capone's enforcers, possibly including hitman Fred Burke and the infamous machine gun Jack McGurn, though Capone himself was in Florida, carefully orchestrating an alibi. Without a word, the police officers and their accomplices opened fire with submachine guns and shotguns. The barrage was merciless and deafening. Moran's men were cut down in a hail of bullets, riddled with dozens of rounds each. The garage floor ran red with blood. When the killers left, they ensured the police officers were seen escorting the plainclothesmen out, creating the illusion of arrests, further confusing any potential witnesses. The aftermath, public outcry and federal response. The scene discovered by actual police was horrific. 7 men, slaughtered in cold blood. The St. Valentine's Day massacre shocked the nation and the world. It was a brazen, calculated act of mass murder, carried out with chilling precision. While no one was ever officially charged, everyone knew who was behind it: Al Capone. This event was a critical turning point. The public's initial fascination with Capone, his Robin Hood persona, began to crumble, replaced by widespread outrage and genuine fear. President Herbert Hoover, disgusted by the brutality and the blatant disregard for law, declared that he would put an end to the Capone gang. He ordered the Treasury Department to form a special unit dedicated to bringing Capone down, by any means necessary. The era of the celebrity gangster was over. The hunt for public enemy number 1 had begun in earnest. The St. Valentine's Day massacre was the beginning of the end for Al Capone. While local law enforcement seemed powerless, or unwilling, to touch him, the federal government was now committed to his downfall. President Hoover's mandate was clear: get Capone. They couldn't get him for murder, not directly, but the brilliant minds at the Treasury Department, particularly a young agent named Frank Wilson and his superior Elmer Irie, devised a strategy that would ultimately prove to be Capone's undoing: income tax evasion. Under the leadership of Agent Eliot Ness, a team of dedicated federal agents was assembled. They became known as the Untouchables because they refused to be bribed or intimidated, a stark contrast to the corrupted Chicago police force. While popular legend often credits Ness and his team with the direct tax evasion case, their primary success lay in systematically raiding Capone's breweries and distilleries, cutting off his cash flow and disrupting his operations. Ness's efforts made Capone's life incredibly difficult, hitting him where it hurt most: his wallet. However, the real architects of Capone's legal demise were the auditors and forensic accountants like Frank Wilson. They meticulously combed through bank records, ledgers, and even newspaper articles, searching for any evidence of undeclared income. The challenge was immense. Capone never signed checks or kept official books, but Wilson found a crucial weakness: Capone's lavish spending and the testimonies of former outfit members who identified specific payments and income streams. Finally, in June 1931, Al Capone was indicted on 22 counts of income tax evasion, covering several years, and charges related to violations of the Volstead Act Prohibition. The government had found its legal Achilles heel. The trial was a sensation. Capone, confident in his ability to bribe or intimidate any jury, initially believed he would walk free. He even attempted to bribe the jury, only for the judge, James H. Wilkerson, to famously switch out the bribed jurors with an uncompromised panel from a different courtroom at the last minute. On October 17, 1931, the verdict came down. Al Capone was found guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion. He was sentenced to an unprecedented 11 years in federal prison, a $50,000 fine, and ordered to pay back taxes. The King of Chicago had been brought down not by bullets, but by balance sheets. Capone initially served time in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, but his influence and ability to bribe guards there became a major concern for federal authorities. In 1934, he was transferred to the newly opened, maximum security federal prison on Alcatraz Island, off the coast of San Francisco. Alcatraz was designed to be escape-proof and corruption-proof. Here, Capone was just another number, stripped of his power, his custom suits replaced by a prison uniform. Life on the Rock was brutal for Capone. His health rapidly deteriorated. He suffered from the advanced stages of neurosyphilis, a condition he had contracted years earlier and left untreated. The disease ravaged his brain, causing periods of confusion, memory loss, and mental decline. He became increasingly isolated, often bullied by other inmates and even mocked by guards. The once feared mob boss was reduced to a shell of his former self, his mind slowly eroding.